He walked into a room full of billionaires carrying a mop bucket and a secret that could save them all, and they laughed him out the door. Nathan Cross was nobody. A technician, a divorced father who smelled like soldering wire and cheap coffee. But when he spotted the trap hidden inside the most glamorous night of the year, he made one quiet choice: warn them anyway. They didn't listen. So he stayed. And when the lights went out and the screaming started, the man they humiliated was the only one standing between the CEO and a body bag. If you're new here, hit subscribe, drop a like, and comment your city or country below. I want to see exactly how far this story travels. Now, let's get into it. The Sterling Grand Hotel was the kind of place that made people feel small on purpose. Everything in it, the 40-foot ceilings, the cascading chandelier that cost more than most people's houses, the marble floors imported from a quarry in northern Italy, had been designed to communicate one thing clearly: you are either someone here or you are nothing. The architects who built it understood that wealth is most comfortable when it is surrounded by beauty that ordinary people cannot touch. Nathan Cross was not ordinary, but nobody in that building knew that. He came through the service entrance at 6:47 in the evening, the same way he always did, badging in with the laminated employee tag clipped to the breast pocket of his gray technician's shirt. The woman at the service desk, Maria, mid-50s, reading glasses perched on the end of her nose, barely looked up from her crossword puzzle when he came through. "Cross," she said, not as a greeting, more like logging data. "Maria." He signed in on the clipboard and kept moving. The gala had been set up in the main ballroom on the third floor. Sterling Dynamics, the company that bore the same name as the hotel's founding family, was hosting a charity auction that evening. One of those events where wealthy people paid obscene amounts of money for things they didn't need in order to feel good about themselves. Nathan had worked 3 of these in the past 2 years. He knew the rhythm. He knew where to stand, when to disappear, and how to do his job without anyone remembering his face. That invisibility was not an accident. He had cultivated it deliberately, the same way he had once cultivated other skills in other places for other reasons he no longer let himself think about too often. He took the service stairs to the 3rd floor, carrying his equipment bag over one shoulder. The bag was heavier than usual tonight. New wireless system for the podium microphones, plus backup receivers in case the primary units dropped signal. He'd been hired specifically because the event coordinator, a tightly wound woman named Priscilla, who communicated exclusively through clipped text messages, had heard that the last audio crew had lost the signal during the keynote at a competing gala. She could not let that happen tonight. Nathan had no intention of letting it happen either. He sat up quietly in the back corner of the ballroom, running his cable checks and frequency scans while the catering staff arranged centerpieces around him, stepping over his gear with the practiced indifference of people who had long ago stopped thinking about the technicians as part of the room. He was furniture. He was infrastructure. He was fine with that. It was during the second frequency scan, around 7:15, that he found the drive. It was sitting on the small utility ledge beneath the main mixing board, a space no guest would ever look, accessible only to someone who knew the room's technical layout. Small. Black. USB-C, with a discrete company logo embossed on the side, a stylized SD that matched the branding on every piece of material he'd seen all night. Sterling Dynamics. He picked it up, turned it over. The drive was encrypted. He could tell from the biometric reader built into the casing, a thin strip of brushed silver along the edge. This was not a vendor drive. This was not a promotional giveaway. This was something that belonged to someone important, and it had been left somewhere that suggested either extreme carelessness or extreme haste. Nathan stood there for a moment, holding it. He thought about setting it back down. It wasn't his problem. He was there to make sure the microphones worked. Then he looked around the room, at the uniformed security personnel stationed near each entrance, at the guests beginning to filter in through the main doors, champagne glasses already appearing in manicured hands, and he pocketed the drive. He'd find someone responsible to return it to. That was the right thing to do. The right thing had always been Nathan's problem. Shut. The gala filled up fast. By 8 o'clock, the ballroom held upward of 300 people, and the noise had risen to that particular pitch of collective self-congratulation that Nathan associated with these events. Not quite a roar, but a sustained hum of wealth performing itself. Women in gowns that cost more than his monthly rent. Men in suits that had been fitted by hand. The kind of crowd where everyone knew everyone, or pretended to. Nathan watched from his position at the mixing board, one earpiece in, monitoring the audio levels with half his attention, while the other half did what it had never entirely stopped doing, scanning the room. It was not a conscious habit anymore. It had become involuntary years ago, during a period of his life he did not discuss. He scanned doorways, exits, sight lines. He noted the positions of the security detail. 6 visible personnel, plus the 2 he'd spotted near the private elevator bank on the north wall, who were doing a credible job of looking like guests, but weren't quite selling it. The shoes were wrong. Men who'd spent their careers standing for hours wore shoes with a specific kind of sole, a specific kind of wear pattern. These 2 had it. He noted that. Filed it. The main event began at 8:30 when Victoria Sterling walked to the podium. Nathan had seen photographs of her in trade publications, in the business section of the city paper, on the framed portraits hung in the hotel lobby. In photographs, she looked composed, polished, every inch the CEO who had taken her late father's company from regional prominence to national significance in under 4 years. Impressive, by any standard. The kind of woman whose portrait got hung in lobbies. In person, she looked tired. Not in a way most people in that room would notice. They were looking at the gown, the posture, the practiced confidence of a 30-year-old who had spent her adult life in rooms that were designed to intimidate her. But Nathan noticed the slight tension behind her eyes, the micro-expression of someone managing a headache or a weight they hadn't set down in a while. She stood at the podium, and she spoke well, and she smiled at the right moments. And Nathan thought, she's working hard tonight. He also thought, she doesn't know. He didn't know yet either, not fully. But something was already beginning to pull at the edge of his attention, the way a loose thread pulls at the edge of a hem. What? He returned the drive at 9:15, or tried to. The route to Sterling's private reception area on the north side of the ballroom required passing through a security checkpoint staffed by a man Nathan had not seen before. Tall, thick through the chest, with the particular stillness of someone who had been trained to project dominance through the absence of movement rather than the presence of it. He wore a communication earpiece and a suit that fit him well enough to suggest serious money behind his outfit. Nathan approached directly. He'd learned a long time ago that hesitation signals guilt. "Excuse me," Nathan said. "I found this near the main mixing board. It looks like it belongs to Ms. Sterling's office." The man looked at the drive, then at Nathan's shirt, which had the audio company's logo on the chest and a coffee stain near the second button. "You're the sound guy," the man said. "Audio technician, yeah." "Give it here." Nathan held the drive out. The man took it without looking at it again, already turning back toward his post. "I'd recommend confirming it gets to someone who can verify the chain of—" "I've got it." Flat. Not aggressive, just final. Nathan nodded. "All right." He walked back toward the mixing board. He'd done what he could. It wasn't his problem anymore. Except 30 seconds later, as he settled back in front of his equipment, he noticed that the man he'd given the drive to had not passed it to anyone. He was standing in his original position with his hands clasped in front of him, the same posture as before, and the drive was gone. Not passed along. Gone. Pocketed. Nathan picked up his equipment clipboard, began writing something that didn't need to be written, and watched. It was the elevator that finally pulled all the threads together. The Sterling Grand's north wall featured a bank of 4 elevators serving the public floors. Adjacent to these, accessible only via a dedicated keycard, was a 5th elevator. The private executive car, used exclusively for the family's personal access to the penthouse and the hotel's private function spaces. Nathan knew about it because the event coordinator had flagged it in the pre-event briefing as a potential signal dead zone for wireless audio. At 9:40, a maintenance cart appeared near the private elevator. 2 men in gray uniforms, the hotel's standard maintenance livery, began working on something near the elevator's exterior panel. Routine, on the surface. Plausible. Except Nathan had checked the maintenance schedule as part of his pre-event sweep. There was nothing scheduled for the north elevator bank during the gala. He'd verified it specifically because the event coordinator had flagged the signal issue. He watched the two men. Their hands were wrong. You develop a particular relationship with your hands when you do physical work for a living. Electricians, maintenance workers, audio technicians, they all have it. The way you grip a tool, the way you carry your body weight when you're working in a confined space. These two men had the uniform, the cart, the tools, but their hands moved like people pretending to work, not people who actually did. And the panel they were working on, Nathan had been near enough to that elevator 3 times tonight. The panel they were focused on was not a maintenance panel. It was the emergency override. Nathan set down his clipboard. He scanned the room. Security chief, the man he'd seen coordinating the private security detail when he arrived, was positioned near the south entrance, roughly 140 feet away. Nathan had caught the man's name from a conversation between 2 of the event staff. Logan Pierce, broad, maybe 50, former military by the posture. Victoria Sterling was currently at a table near the center of the room, speaking with a group of guests. The private elevator was on her scheduled exit route. Nathan had overheard that detail too, from Priscilla's tightly clipped instructions to the catering team about clearing a path at 10:30. He looked at the 2 men at the elevator. He looked at the private elevator doors. He looked at Victoria Sterling, who was laughing at something a white-haired man in a tuxedo was saying. 45 minutes, maybe. Less, if the schedule ran early. He picked up the clipboard and walked toward Logan Pierce. The conversation lasted 90 seconds and did not go well. "Excuse me," Nathan said, positioning himself at Pierce's elbow without cutting in front of him. "I need to flag something to you about the north elevator." Pierce turned his head. The look he gave Nathan was the specific look of a man who has spent decades deciding, in under a second, whether a person is worth his time. "Technician? Audio. I noticed 2 men working on the executive elevator's emergency override during a window that doesn't match the maintenance schedule I was given for tonight. I wanted to—" "We swept the building," Pierce said. "I understand. I'm not suggesting you missed something during the sweep. I'm saying these men showed up after the event started, and the way they're—" "What's your name?" "Cross. Nathan Cross." Pierce looked at him for a moment. Something shifted in his expression. Not recognition, exactly. More like a door closing. "Mr. Cross, we have 30 security personnel in this building tonight. We have verified the event perimeter. If I need input from the audio crew, I'll ask for it. I'm not trying to step on your operation. I just think someone should physically verify what those 2— Davis." Pierce didn't raise his voice. One of his personnel materialized at his shoulder. "Please escort Mr. Cross back to his station." The personnel, Davis, young, built like someone who'd played college football 4 years ago and not quite stopped, stepped into Nathan's peripheral vision. Not aggressive, just definitive. From somewhere nearby, Nathan heard laughter, not directed at him, ambient from a cluster of guests, but the timing of it hit like a thrown stone. He looked at Pierce. Pierce had already looked away. Nathan nodded once. "All right." He walked back toward the mixing board, with Davis 2 steps behind him, close enough to make the escort obvious to anyone watching. He was aware of the eyes that found him for a moment, the curious, passing attention of people who note a disruption before returning to their champagne. He sat down at the mixing board. Davis stood nearby for another minute, then drifted back toward his position. Nathan put his earpiece in, adjusted a level that didn't need adjusting, and he watched the private elevator. Because whatever Logan Pierce believed, Nathan had spent 4 years in places where the difference between ignoring a threat and addressing it was measured in lives. He had learned to read environments the way other people read text, not word by word, but in complete sentences, in full paragraphs of context and implication. And the paragraph he was reading right now said very clearly, "Something is coming through that elevator, and the people in this room do not know it." He checked his watch, 9:52 p.m. The checkout time was 10:30. He had 38 minutes. His hand rested flat on the edge of the mixing board. Not tense, just present. He watched. The mixing board in front of Nathan didn't need his attention anymore. He'd done the work. Frequencies were clean, levels were set. The backup receivers were live and holding signal. Priscilla had texted him 20 minutes ago to confirm everything sounded fine from the podium. His job, technically, was done for the night. He stayed anyway. Not because he was being paid to. Not because he had somewhere better to be, though he did. His son was at a neighbor's apartment 7 miles across the city, and Marcus always had trouble sleeping when Nathan worked late, even at 9 years old, even when he tried to pretend he didn't care. But Nathan stayed because the alternative was walking away from something he hadn't finished understanding, and he had never been able to do that. The 2 men at the elevator were gone. That bothered him more than their presence had. They'd packed up the maintenance cart around 10 o'clock and moved it back into the service corridor. Casual, unhurried, the way people move when they believe they are invisible. Nathan had tracked them until they disappeared through the service door, and then he'd given it 90 seconds before crossing the room on a diagonal path that looked, he hoped, like a technician heading toward the secondary speaker array on the north wall. He stopped at the elevator panel and spent 40 seconds pretending to check something on his clipboard while actually looking at the emergency override housing. The panel had been relocked, clean, no obvious tampering. Someone who glanced at it would see nothing wrong. Nathan crouched slightly, angled the clipboard to block his face from the nearest camera, and looked at the lower edge of the housing. A scratch. Fresh. The metal was bright where the coating had been scraped, not oxidized. And the indicator light on the override panel, which should have been a steady amber, was cycling, almost imperceptibly. A pulse, maybe once every 4 seconds, that the ambient lighting in the corridor turned nearly invisible. He straightened up. Kept walking. Made it look like he'd found what he came for and moved on. The override had been modified, not disabled. That would have triggered an alarm in the hotel's security command center. Modified. Reprogrammed, possibly. The kind of work that required someone who knew exactly what they were doing and had the right equipment to do it without leaving an obvious trace. This was not improvised. This had been planned. Nathan walked back toward his station, and while he walked, he let himself think about the drive. Oh, he hadn't meant to think about it. He'd made the decision to return it and move on, and he'd done that, and the outcome had been what it was. But the man who'd pocketed it, the one stationed at the entrance to Victoria's private reception area, was not in his original position anymore. Nathan had noticed that at 9:50, without registering it consciously, the way you notice when a piece of furniture has been moved but don't think about it until later. Now he thought about it. The man had the drive. The drive was encrypted, biometric. Whoever had placed it on that ledge beneath the mixing board had put it there deliberately, close enough to the audio setup that it would be found by a technician rather than a guest, but not so close that it looked like it had been dropped accidentally. Hidden, but findable. The kind of placement that says, I need this retrieved without making a scene, which meant whoever hid it there had expected to retrieve it themselves, or had expected a specific person to find it. And instead, Nathan had found it. And instead of it going back to someone who knew what to do with it, it had gone into the pocket of a man who was now no longer at his post. Nathan thought about the maintenance cart, the elevator override, the displaced security guard, the drive. He thought about the fact that in the 2.5 hours he'd been in this building, he had seen 6 things that did not belong, and every single one of them was north of the ballroom's center line, clustered around Victoria Sterling's planned exit route, like stones placed across a river. He sat down at the mixing board, put his hands on his knees. You don't know this room, he told himself. You don't know these people. You read a maintenance schedule off a briefing sheet and you watch 2 guys push a cart. That's not intelligence. That's paranoia dressed up as pattern recognition. He'd been told something like that before, by people with more authority than Logan Pierce, by people who'd had folders full of documentation to support their certainty that Nathan Cross saw threats where there were none, that his instincts had led him wrong, that his career and his judgment were not to be trusted. He'd believed them for a while. It had cost him. He looked at the private elevator. The indicator light above the doors was cycling wrong. He could see it from here, faint, barely perceptible, but wrong. The same wrong pulse he'd seen on the override panel. His jaw tightened. 25 minutes. Bamsid. The man's name was Damian Mercer, though Nathan didn't know that yet. Nathan knew him only by the quality of his stillness, the way he stood near the far end of the private reception corridor without appearing to stand there, one hand loosely holding a champagne flute he'd been nursing for the better part of an hour. He wore a suit that was subtly better than the other suits in the room, the kind of upgrade most people couldn't articulate but felt. He smiled when smiled at. He moved when he needed to move. He was very good at being in a room without being in it. Nathan had picked him up at 9:30, initially cataloging him the way he cataloged everyone else. Potential civilian, not a threat. But in the last 20 minutes, Mercer had shifted position 4 times. Each shift brought him marginally closer to the north side of the room, to the corridor that connected the ballroom to the private elevator bank. He never moved in a straight line. He moved the way water moves around an obstacle, finding the path of least resistance, never drawing attention to his direction. Nathan watched him circle a group of guests near the north corridor entrance, laughing at something someone said, touching a man's arm in the way you touch someone's arm when you want them to remember you as warm. Then he was past the group and he was in the corridor. Nathan glanced toward Logan Pierce's position. Pierce was occupied. A woman in a green gown was speaking to him with the body language of someone who was not going to be brief. And Pierce, whatever his faults, was a professional, and professionals did not brush off guests at their principal's events. Nathan stood up. He took his time. No urgency in his body. He picked up his equipment bag, slung it over one shoulder, and made his way toward the north corridor, using the room's perimeter rather than cutting through the center. He passed a waiter, nodded to a cater waiter who was stacking empty glasses onto a tray, reached the corridor entrance and turned into it as though he had a destination in mind, and that destination happened to be in this direction. The corridor was quieter than the ballroom, softer lighting. The carpet was a deep charcoal, the walls lined with framed photographs of the Sterling family across generations, black and whites from the hotel's early years giving way to color as the decades progressed. Victoria's face appeared about a third of the way down the wall, teenage, in a photograph beside a man who must have been her father. She looked serious in it, not sad exactly, just serious, like someone who understood early that the world was going to ask a lot from her. Mercer was near the end of the corridor, speaking quietly to the guard Nathan had given the drive to. The guard had his back to Nathan. Mercer saw Nathan immediately. His eyes went to him and held for a fraction of a second before he continued talking, the smoothness of the transition so practiced that anyone watching casually would have seen nothing. Nathan stopped at the framed photograph 3 feet to his left and pretended to look at it. He couldn't hear what they were saying. He was too far. But he watched Mercer's hands in his peripheral vision, and he saw the moment when the guard passed something to Mercer. Small, dark, fitting in a closed palm. And Mercer's hand closed around it and dropped to his side. The drive. Mercer smiled at the guard, said something final, then turned and walked back up the corridor, back toward the ballroom, and Nathan turned slightly away from the photograph as Mercer passed, just enough to reduce his profile, not enough to make the reduction obvious. Mercer went past him without slowing. Nathan looked at the photograph. Victoria Sterling, maybe 16 years old, standing beside her father in front of this hotel. Serious face, eyes that were going to have a long career of not letting things go. He made himself stand there for another 30 seconds before he moved. What Nathan understood by 10:15 was this. Someone inside the organization had planned this carefully and over a long stretch of time. The modifications to the elevator weren't the work of a single evening. That kind of technical work required access, preparation, and a detailed knowledge of the hotel's systems. The false security personnel, and Nathan was now fairly certain that 2 of the men he'd cataloged as event security were not event security, required coordination, credentialing, insertion into the roster without triggering Pierce's vetting process. That meant someone who either had the authority to amend the security roster or had the means to manipulate someone who did. Mercer had the drive. The drive was encrypted, biometric, and had been hidden near the audio setup, a technical area that the event security sweep would have cleared but not closely inspected, because audio equipment is largely invisible to people not looking for it. Whoever had hidden the drive there had access to the ballroom before the sweep, which put them inside the event's operational structure. Nathan thought about all of this standing at his mixing board, not touching any of the equipment, looking at the room without appearing to look at anything. The picture that was forming was not comfortable. This was not a robbery. Robberies at high-end events were opportunistic, fast, and centered on extractable valuables. What he was looking at had the architecture of something else. A controlled situation designed to isolate a specific individual and apply specific pressure at a specific moment. The exit route modification, the drive retrieval, the false personnel. These were pieces of a system. A machine built to funnel one person into one place at one time. Victoria Sterling, private elevator, 10:30 departure. He looked at her across the room. She was finishing a conversation near the center of the ballroom, the white-haired man from earlier now replaced by a younger couple who seemed genuinely delighted to be talking to her. She was smiling back at them, and it looked from this distance like a real smile this time, not the managed one from the podium. Like something in the conversation had caught her off guard in a way she appreciated. She did not know. Nathan looked toward the north corridor, back to Victoria, back to the elevator indicator light, visible through the corridor entrance, still cycling wrong. He thought about Logan Pierce, who had dismissed him with the particular efficiency of someone who had made that kind of decision 10,000 times and been right 9,999 of them. He thought about the woman at the service desk who hadn't looked up from her crossword. He thought about Marcus, 9 years old, asleep by now probably, at the neighbor's apartment with the nightlight on in the hallway because Marcus said he was too old for nightlights, but always left it on anyway. He thought about the last time he had been certain about something in a room full of people who were certain he was wrong and what had happened after. He pulled out his phone, opened it, found the event coordinator's contact, Priscilla, and typed, "Need 2 minutes with security lead, not about audio, urgent." He sent it, looked up. Priscilla was visible near the catering station, phone in hand. He watched her read the message, watched her face going through a micro-calculation. The inconvenience of it, the uncertainty of what urgent meant from the sound guy, the possibility that ignoring it would create a bigger problem than addressing it. She glanced up, found him across the room with the practiced efficiency of an event coordinator who always knew where her crew was, and gave him a look that said, "This better be worth it." She started moving toward Pierce. Nathan looked back at the elevator. 15 minutes. The second conversation with Logan Pierce lasted 4 minutes and went worse than the first. Pierce came to him this time, crossing the room with Priscilla half a step behind, and the expression on his face was the expression of a man extending a professional courtesy he hadn't decided to extend, not fully. "Mr. Cross." Not warm, not hostile, somewhere in the middle that was actually harder to work with than either. "Priscilla says you have something." "2 things. Nathan said. He kept his voice low and level, the way you speak when you need someone to hear the content of what you're saying, rather than the urgency of how you're saying it. "The private elevator's emergency override panel has been modified. I checked it at 10 after 10. The indicator light is cycling on a 4-second pulse that doesn't match the hotel's standard system behavior. And the man you stationed at the reception corridor entrance, the one I gave the drive to, passed it to a guest about 20 minutes ago. A man in a dark suit, mid-40s, well-built, been working the north side of the room all night." Pierce looked at him. "You've been watching my personnel," he said. "I've been watching the room. It's a habit." "A habit." Pierce glanced at Priscilla, who was doing her best to look like she wasn't there, then back at Nathan. "What's your background, Mr. Cross?" "Audio technician." "Before that?" Nathan held the eye contact. "That's not relevant to what I'm telling you." Something shifted in Pierce's face. Not much. A millimeter of recalibration. "The elevator was inspected at 7 p.m. and again at 9. Our people cleared it." "I'm aware of that. I'm telling you, the panel shows signs of modification that post-date your 9 o'clock sweep. Someone went into that override housing between 9 and 10, and I watched 2 men in maintenance uniforms do it." "You watched them?" "Yes." "From your position at the mixing board?" "Yes." Pierce was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What exactly is it you think is happening tonight?" "I think someone inside this event's logistics has spent a significant amount of time setting up a situation designed to isolate Ms. Sterling at the moment she uses that elevator. I think the encrypted drive that I returned was part of that setup, and I think it's now in the hands of someone who isn't on your team." He paused. "I could be wrong. I'd rather be wrong. But I think you should delay the 10:30 departure and physically re-inspect that elevator before she uses it." Pierce studied him for a long moment. The room hummed around them, oblivious, silver and gold, and well-fed and untroubled. "You could be an element of what you're describing," Pierce said. It wasn't an accusation. It was the logical observation of a professional. "Someone inserted into the venue under a service contract, feeding me a story that delays the response while the real threat positions itself." "I know," Nathan said. "That's a reasonable concern. Run me. Right now if you want. My name, my badge number, the company I work for. You'll have a clean file. Nothing in it that contradicts what I'm telling you. A clean file can be manufactured. Yes. Everything I'm saying to you can be part of a deception. If it is, you'll know in about 15 minutes when nothing happens and you'll have wasted some time." He held Pierce's gaze. "But if it isn't, I heard you the first time," Pierce said. He looked away. His hand moved to his earpiece. Nathan waited. Pierce said something low into the comm, too quiet to catch. Then he looked back at Nathan. "Stay at your station." It was not an agreement. It was not a refusal. It was the response of a man buying 30 seconds to make a decision, which was 30 seconds more than Nathan had had 5 minutes ago. He went back to his station. He put his hand flat on the edge of the mixing board and watched the clock on his phone read 10:19 and thought about the way the indicator light was cycling on the elevator panel, 4-second pulse, and thought about the two men and their maintenance cart and their wrong hands, and thought about Mercer's closed fist and the dark shape that had disappeared into it, and thought about Marcus asleep in someone else's apartment with the hallway light on. He thought, 11 minutes. He thought, come on, Pierce. Across the room, Victoria Sterling was beginning to make the circuit of final goodbyes, the slow, gracious unwinding of a host from her guests that preceded a departure. She was moving toward the north end of the room, not quickly, but moving. Nathan watched the private elevator corridor. Nothing moved there. The indicator light pulsed. His phone lit up. A text from a number he didn't recognize, no contact name. 3 words. Don't touch it. He stared at the screen. Then he looked up, slowly, and scanned the room. Every corner, every face turned in his general direction. Every person who might be holding a phone pointed toward him or watching for his reaction. He found Mercer at the ballroom's east entrance. Not looking at him, looking at Victoria Sterling with the patient, settled attention of a man who knew exactly how the next 11 minutes were going to go. Nathan's thumb moved to dial Pierce's number. His phone went dead. The screen didn't go dark. It froze, locked, completely unresponsive. He pressed the home button. Nothing. Power button. Nothing. He looked at the audio board and watched 3 of his wireless receivers lose signal simultaneously, the signal meters dropping to 0, and he understood that the jamming had started, which meant the timeline had moved up. He was already standing when the lights in the north corridor went out. The north corridor went dark, and the ballroom didn't notice. That was the design of it. The lighting failure was contained, surgical, affecting only the stretch of hallway between the ballroom's north entrance and the private elevator bank. To the 300 people still working their way through the evening's final hour, nothing had changed. The chandeliers still burned. The string quartet that had been playing softly in the far corner was still playing. The bar was still open. Whatever was happening on the other side of that corridor wall was invisible to everyone who mattered, which was precisely the point. Nathan was already moving when the lights dropped. He didn't run. Running in a ballroom full of wealthy people creates attention, and attention was the one thing he could not afford right now. He moved the way he'd learned to move in environments where speed and invisibility had to coexist, fast enough to cover ground, controlled enough to look, at a glance, like a man with a purpose rather than a man with a problem. He kept to the room's perimeter, using the edge of the crowd as cover, his equipment bag still over one shoulder because dropping it would mark the spot where something changed. He reached the north corridor entrance in 18 seconds. The darkness inside wasn't total. Emergency strip lighting had kicked in along the base of the walls. Low, amber, enough to navigate by if you knew what you were looking at. Nathan stepped into the corridor and let the door close behind him and stood completely still for 3 full seconds, doing nothing but listening. Footsteps. 2 sets. Heavy, moving from the direction of the elevator. A 3rd set, lighter, irregular, someone being moved rather than moving voluntarily. He went left, staying close to the wall, using the framed photographs as reference points in the low light. The Sterling family watched him from their frames, generation after generation, going back to a time when this building was someone's ambition rather than someone's inheritance. He passed Victoria at 16, still serious, and kept moving. The elevator bank came into view. There were 3 of them. 2 men flanking a third figure, Victoria Sterling, still in the gown, one arm held at the elbow by the man on her left with a grip that was professional and deliberate and designed to look, from the right angle, like an escort rather than a restraint. The man on her right had a hand inside his jacket. The elevator doors were open, interior light spilling into the corridor in a pale rectangle. Victoria was not panicking. Nathan noted that with something close to respect. She was taut. He could see it in her shoulders, in the set of her jaw. But she was thinking, not freezing, which was more than most people managed when the situation stopped making sense. "This isn't the approved departure route," she said. Her voice was level, controlled. The voice of someone buying time. "Change of plan, Ms. Sterling," the man on her left said. "Mr. Mercer's instructions." "Damien doesn't give instructions for my departures." "Tonight he does." Nathan assessed the distance. 14 feet, maybe 15. The man on the right had his hand in his jacket and his weight on his back foot, which meant he was covering the corridor behind them, covering Nathan's direction. But his eyes hadn't found Nathan yet because Nathan hadn't given them anything to find. The strip lighting was behind Nathan, putting him in the darker end of the corridor. The man's pupils hadn't adjusted from the brighter elevator interior. He had maybe 3 seconds before that changed. He looked at the space between the 2 men and Victoria. He looked at the elevator interior. 1 more person inside, visible as a shape near the back wall. 4 total. The one inside was the complication. Nathan set his equipment bag down against the wall. Quietly. Not silently. Perfect silence creates its own attention, but quietly enough. He picked up one of the framed photographs from the wall. Heavy, solid frame, maybe 2.5 pounds. He held it at his side. Then he walked forward. Not fast, not slow. The walk of a man who belongs in a corridor and has something to do there. The man on the right found him at 11 feet. "Hey!" Nathan threw the frame, not at the man, at the elevator door track, low, skipping it off the floor so it clattered into the door mechanism with a sharp metallic crack that made both men flinch toward the sound, one of those involuntary responses that training can reduce but never fully eliminate, because the sound of something hitting metal near a confined space reads as explosive to a prepared nervous system, and the body reacts before the brain finishes its assessment. In the half-second of that flinch, Nathan closed the distance. He went for the man on the left first because the man on the left had Victoria's arm, and that was the immediate problem. He came in from the man's outside shoulder, got a hand on his wrist, and applied pressure to the specific joint that made holding on hurt more than letting go. The man's grip broke. Nathan stepped between him and Victoria, put his back to her, and had just enough time to register that the man on the right was bringing his hand out of his jacket before he moved into him instead of away, closing distance rather than creating it, which was counterintuitive enough to cost the man a beat. The beat was enough. The weapon came up and Nathan was already inside its effective range, his left hand redirecting the man's forearm outward while his right elbow connected with the man's jaw. Not a full-force strike, controlled, enough to disconnect his focus without putting him completely down, because a completely unconscious man on the floor of this corridor created a different set of problems. The man on the left had recovered and grabbed Nathan's shoulder. Nathan let himself be pulled, used the momentum, turned into it, and drove the man back into the corridor wall hard enough to shake 2 of the framed photographs loose. The man hit the wall and slid, not out, but dazed, legs uncertain beneath him. 6 seconds, start to finish. Victoria Sterling was pressed against the opposite wall, watching him. Her face had gone through several things in those 6 seconds and was currently somewhere between shock and a sharp, rapid recalibration of who this person was. "Come on," Nathan said. She didn't move for a half-second. He understood it. She'd just watched the sound technician dismantle 2 trained men in the time it took to draw a breath, and her brain was doing the reasonable thing, which was asking whether she was better off with them or with him. "I'm not part of this," he said. "The elevator is rigged. We need to move. She pushed off the wall and moved. From inside the elevator, the fourth man was coming out. Nathan shoved Victoria back toward the ballroom end of the corridor and turned to meet him. This one was bigger than the other two, broader, and he came out of the elevator without hesitation, which meant he'd either seen what happened on his monitor and prepared, or he was simply the kind of person who came out of tight spaces without hesitation regardless. Either way, he was faster than Nathan expected. He caught Nathan by the collar and drove him into the opposite wall, and Nathan's shoulder hit the edge of a doorframe and the pain spiked up into his neck, sharp enough to make his vision white for a quarter second. The man was strong. Nathan got a hand up between them, created just enough space to move his head offline as the man's forearm came across, felt it graze his cheekbone rather than connect fully, which was the difference between dazed and functional. He dropped his weight, went low, got his arms around the man's midsection, and used the wall behind him as leverage to drive forward. They went down together, and Nathan came out on top, and he got a forearm across the back of the man's neck with enough pressure to matter and held it. The man struggled for a few seconds. Then his body made the calculation that bodies make when the oxygen supply to the brain becomes a question rather than a certainty, and he went still. Nathan held the pressure for another 2 seconds, then released, stood up. His shoulder was broadcasting pain down to his elbow. His face felt wrong on the left side where the forearm had grazed it. He put his back against the wall and breathed for a moment, 2 full breaths, in through the nose, out through the mouth, because adrenaline is useful, and also, if you let it run unchecked, it will make you stupid. Victoria was 10 feet away, watching him. The corridor was quiet except for the sound of someone groaning softly. The man he'd put against the wall starting to come back. Nathan looked at him, then at the elevator, then at the ballroom door. "We need to get back into the main room," he said. "Stay close to me. Don't explain anything to anyone until we can get to security command." "Who are you?" Victoria said. Not accusatory, genuinely asking. "Right now I'm the guy who knows the elevator was rigged. Everything else can wait." She held his gaze for a moment. Something in her expression settled. Not trust exactly, but the decision to act as though she trusted him, which was the practical version of the same thing. "Okay," she said. They went back through the ballroom door together. The ballroom noticed. Not the way it would have if there'd been shouting or blood. This was a crowd trained by wealth and social anxiety to ignore things that disrupted the evening's tone. But Victoria Sterling reappearing through the north corridor door without her scheduled escort, accompanied by a man in a technician's shirt whose face was already beginning to show the early bruise of a graze along the cheekbone, did not go unnoticed. Heads turned. A ripple moved through the nearest cluster of guests. The string quartet kept playing because no one had told them to stop. Logan Pierce found them in 11 seconds. He came across the room fast, 2 of his personnel flanking him, and his face had the expression of a man who was processing several things simultaneously and not liking the conclusions he was reaching. "Ms. Sterling, Damian Mercer," Victoria said. "Find him, right now. Don't let him leave this building." Pierce's eyes went to Nathan, took in the bruised cheek, the posture, the equipment bag that was no longer over Nathan's shoulder. His jaw moved slightly, like he was revising something. "What happened in that corridor, he said. 3 of your event security personnel attempted to force Ms. Sterling into the private elevator," Nathan said. "1 more was waiting inside. The elevator override was modified earlier tonight. I flagged it to you at 10:19. The jamming started at approximately 10:22, and your window to respond closed before you could act on it." He kept his voice even, not accusatory, just factual. "The men in the corridor need to be secured before they move. The one inside the elevator is still in there, as far as I know." Pierce was already talking into his earpiece. Victoria put her hand on Pierce's arm. "Logan, the drive. The encrypted drive. Nathan found it earlier tonight and tried to return it. Mercer's man intercepted it. Wherever Mercer is, the drive is with him." Pierce looked at her, then at Nathan, then back at her. "You know this man?" "I know him now," she said. Something crossed Pierce's face. It might have been the beginning of an apology, or it might have been the suppression of one. He was not the kind of man who apologized easily, and the evening wasn't over yet. "Mr. Cross," he said, "Bites, stay close." "I wasn't planning on going anywhere," Nathan said. Atroce. The next 12 minutes were controlled chaos in the specific way that well-trained people create chaos. Purposeful, compartmentalized, ugly around the edges. Pierce's team secured the north corridor. The 3 men Nathan had put down were flex-cuffed and moved to a service room. The fourth, in the elevator, offered a brief resistance and then didn't. Pierce confirmed, via the hotel's security command center, that the elevator override had in fact been tampered with. The modified programming would have stopped the car between the third and second floors and held it there, locked from exterior operation, for a window of approximately 20 minutes before the hotel's failsafe would have kicked in. 20 minutes was enough time to do whatever Damian Mercer needed to do. Nathan stood in the security command center on the second floor and watched the camera feeds while a woman named Chen, Pierce's technical lead, sharp and quick and not interested in pleasantries, worked through the hotel's system logs to reconstruct the evening surveillance gap. Cameras on the north corridor went offline at 9:47, she said, not looking up from her screen. Rebooted at 10:18, which is why your window on the override panel showed clean when Mr. Pierce sent someone to verify it at 10:20. I looked at it at 10:10, Nathan said. The scratch on the housing was still bright. Right, they went in at 9:47 and were done by 10:10, 13 minutes to modify an encrypted federal-grade override system. She looked up briefly. That's not amateur work. No, Nathan agreed. It's not. Pierce came through the door. Mercer's not in the building. He moved out through the south service entrance at 10:17, 6 minutes before the jamming started. He had a 3-minute head start before we knew anything was wrong. Victoria Sterling was sitting in the command center's secondary chair, shoes off, which was the first time all evening that Nathan had seen her look exactly like a 30-year-old woman instead of the CEO of a significant corporation. The gown was slightly torn at the left seam, where the man had gripped her arm. She was looking at the camera feeds on the main screen, her expression doing several things that she wasn't quite managing to control. He planned this from outside, she said. It wasn't a question. The execution, yes, Pierce said. He needed to be clean when investigators arrived. Inside enough to run it, outside enough to deny involvement. He looked at Nathan. The drive. He has it, Nathan said. What's on it? Victoria answered. I don't know what it was doing here tonight. It belongs to our legal archive system. It's the kind of drive that holds board documentation, executed contracts, succession protocols. She paused. If Damian had access to the archive credentials, he's been your operations director for 4 years, Pierce said quietly. She looked at him. Yes. The room was quiet for a moment, except for Chen's keyboard. Nathan looked at the camera feed showing the hotel's south service corridor. Empty now, the door at the far end closed. Whatever advantage Mercer had built himself in the last 4 years, walking out through it 20 minutes ago. He thought about the drive. He thought about a biometric encrypted drive belonging to a corporate legal archive, placed beneath an audio mixing board at a high-end charity gala by someone who'd had access to the room before the security sweep, someone who'd needed it retrieved without attracting attention, or alternatively, someone who had been trying to get it out of Mercer's reach and had run out of time and options. Ms. Sterling, he said, who else had access to the legal archive system? She looked at him. What do you mean? The drive was hidden on my side of the mixing board. Not dropped, not lost, placed. Deliberately concealed in a location that a technician would find during equipment setup, in a space that the security sweep would clear but not closely inspect. Someone put it there intentionally. He watched her face. Someone who wasn't Mercer. The silence this time was different. It had weight. Victoria's eyes went to Pierce, then to the floor, then back to Nathan, and in her expression there was the particular exhaustion of a person arriving at a conclusion they'd been avoiding. My assistant, she said. Elena. She handles the archive credentials for my office. Where is she tonight? She was supposed to be here. She sent me a message at 9 o'clock saying she wasn't feeling well. A pause. She never sends messages like that. She comes in with 101 fever and sends messages like that. She knew, Nathan said. Not an accusation, just the shape of it, settling into place. She knew what Mercer was planning, or part of it. She got the drive out of wherever he had it and hid it where she thought it would end up in the right hands. She hid it with the audio equipment, Pierce said slowly, because she knew that if anything went wrong with the event's sound system, building security would review the mixing board area. She was creating a recovery point. It didn't end up in the right hands, Victoria said. It ended up in Mercer's. It ended up in mine first, Nathan said, and I made sure someone knew about it. Another silence. Chen's keyboard had stopped. Pierce was looking at Nathan with the specific expression of a man who has been reassessing something in real time for the past 20 minutes and has just reached a conclusion that sits badly with him, not because it's wrong, but because of what it implies about his earlier judgment. "Mr. Cross," he said, "I owe you an apology." "You owe me about 30 seconds of your undivided attention," Nathan said. "Save the apology for later. Mercer has the drive and a head start and a plan that didn't go the way he needed it to go tonight, which means he's going to move faster than he would have otherwise." "What's in that building's basement?" Pierce blinked. "The evacuation system, secondary exits, emergency vehicle access, the utility corridors that connect to the parking structure." "Does Mercer know the layout?" "He oversaw the building's security consultation 3 years ago. He knows it better than most of my team." Nathan looked at the camera feeds. He found the one pointing at the basement access stairwell on the hotel's east side. The door at the bottom of the frame was slightly ajar, a thin line of light visible along its edge. "That door should be closed," Chen said from her station. "Yes," Nathan said. "It should." He looked at Pierce. Pierce looked at him. "He didn't run," Nathan said. "He came back." But the basement of the Sterling Grand was a different world from the marble and crystal above it. Down here it was concrete and conduit, exposed pipe running along low ceilings, the ambient sound of the building's mechanical systems, HVAC, water pressure, the deep electrical hum of the transformer banks that fed the event lighting upstairs. The utility corridors ran in a grid pattern beneath the hotel's footprint, connecting to the parking structure on the west side and the emergency vehicle bay on the east, functional, industrial, not designed for people who didn't need to be there. Mercer needed to be there. Pierce had 3 personnel covering the basement access points, which sounded like enough, until Nathan walked the layout with Chen's floor plan on a tablet and counted 7 secondary access points that didn't appear on the standard security schematic: maintenance hatches, conduit access panels, a decommissioned dumbwaiter shaft that connected the basement utility corridor to the hotel's second-floor service kitchen. "These aren't on your sweep checklist," Nathan said. "They're not marked as access points in the current building spec," Pierce said, looking over his shoulder at the tablet. "Mercer wrote the security consultation," Nathan said. "He knows which ones aren't on the checklist." Pierce made the face of a man swallowing something unpleasant. He got on his radio and started repositioning personnel. Nathan moved ahead. He wasn't supposed to. Pierce had been explicit about that. The quiet authority of a man who protects people for a living and does not enjoy civilians operating in his tactical space. But Pierce was occupied with his radio, and Nathan had the tablet with the floor plan, and there was a corridor on the east side of the basement that connected the utility grid to the emergency vehicle bay, and it was the only route to the bay that bypassed all 3 of Pierce's covered access points. And if he were Mercer, if he were a man with a biometric drive and a plan that had partially failed, and a vehicle waiting somewhere in that bay, that was the corridor he would use. The basement was cold. Nathan moved through it the way he'd moved through other cold, functional spaces in other parts of the world that he didn't think about anymore. Low, quiet, using the sound of the building's mechanical systems as cover. The corridor bent left, then right, following the hotel's foundation line. Emergency lighting here was better than in the north corridor upstairs. Fluorescent strips in the ceiling, all of them working, casting everything in that flat, unhealthy light that makes people look wrong. He heard voices at the corridor's second bend. He stopped, pressed against the wall, listened. 2 voices. One of them was Mercer's, smooth, the voice of a man accustomed to being in charge of rooms, slightly tight at the edges now, the tightness of controlled frustration. The other was someone Nathan didn't recognize, lower, shorter responses, the voice of someone receiving instructions rather than exchanging them. Change in the vehicle, but the side bay, not the main, 40 seconds. The drive is fine. Move. Footsteps. Moving away from Nathan's position toward the vehicle bay. Nathan looked back down the corridor. Pierce's personnel weren't visible yet. They were still moving into position, 40 seconds minimum, before anyone covered the side bay entrance. He pushed off the wall and moved. The corridor opened into the vehicle bay through a heavy fire door, propped slightly open with a rubber wedge. Mercer's preparation. Another detail from 3 years of consultation work, knowing which door would buy him the time he needed. Nathan went through it and into the bay. 2 vehicles. A black SUV with the engine running, exhaust hanging in the cold air, a man in the driver's seat visible through the windshield, and Mercer, 10 feet from Nathan, in the process of opening the passenger door, the drive in his left hand. He saw Nathan at the same moment Nathan came through the door. For a half second, neither of them moved. Mercer's face ran through a rapid sequence: surprise, calculation, the decision about what surprise meant in terms of what came next. "You should have gone home," Mercer said. Not theatrical, just a fact. "Probably," Nathan said. Mercer made a small movement with his right hand, and Nathan registered that his right hand had been inside his jacket, and he moved before the calculation was finished because, in his experience, the calculation was always slower than the action, and he'd learned that in a way that didn't leave room for debate. He crossed the 10 feet fast, went inside the right hand's arc, got his hand on Mercer's wrist and locked it, used the momentum of Mercer's own draw to turn the man's body outward rather than in. Mercer was fit, trained by someone, and he didn't panic, which made him more dangerous than the men upstairs, and also slightly more predictable, because trained people have patterns. Mercer went for Nathan's knee with his left foot, a clean practice sweep attempt. Nathan stepped into it instead of away, absorbed the contact, and put Mercer against the SUV's hood with his arm behind his back at an angle that made resistance a simple equation of pain. The drive skittered across the concrete floor. The driver's door opened. The driver came out. The fire door came open behind Nathan at the same moment, and Logan Pierce came through it, and 2 of his personnel came through it, and the driver looked at the 2 personnel and made the specific calculation that people make when they count and the numbers don't favor them, and he put his hands up. It was not clean. Nathan's shoulder was screaming from the earlier impact, and Mercer was not going quietly. He was still pushing against the arm lock, jaw set, the desperate energy of a man watching something he'd built for years come apart in the span of an evening. But it was over, and they both knew it was over, and there is a particular kind of silence that falls when a person finally stops fighting a conclusion they've been postponing. Mercer went still. Nathan maintained the lock for another 5 seconds. Then he stepped back and let Pierce's personnel take over, and he stood in the cold vehicle bay breathing, hands at his sides, listening to the sound of the building's mechanical systems humming through the walls, steady and indifferent and ongoing. Pierce picked up the drive from the concrete floor. He turned it over in his hand, looked at it, then looked at Nathan. "Your shoulder," he said. Nathan glanced down at it. "Yeah. There's a medic upstairs." "In a minute." Pierce nodded. He looked at the drive again. Then, without ceremony, he said, "Cross, I need to know who you actually are." It was a reasonable question. It was the question that Nathan had been managing in one way or another for the better part of 6 years, deflecting it, sidestepping it, reducing himself in rooms until the question didn't arise because nobody thought to ask it. He looked at Mercer, now flex-cuffed and sitting against the SUV's rear wheel, the operations director of Sterling Dynamics, the architect of a plan that had spent months assembling itself in the space behind a polished, trusted face. He looked at the drive in Pierce's hand. He thought about the maintenance panel with its wrong indicator light, about the text that had come to his phone before the jamming killed it, about Marcus asleep in someone else's apartment with the hallway light on. "Right now," Nathan said, "I'm the guy who found your drive." Pierce held his gaze. Something in his face shifted. Not quite recognition, but the precursor to it, like a word on the tip of a tongue. And then his eyes dropped to Nathan's left wrist, where the sleeve of the technician's shirt had ridden up during the struggle. and Nathan felt Pierce's focus land there and hold, and he knew what Pierce was looking at. The scar. Old, faded, running along the inner wrist in the specific pattern that wasn't from an accident. And below it, barely visible, the small geometric mark that men in certain units put in certain places for reasons that had nothing to do with decoration and everything to do with a language that not many people spoke. Pierce's jaw moved. His eyes came back up to Nathan's face, and Nathan watched the door open behind Logan Pierce's eyes. The door to something 6 years ago, to a warehouse in a city that didn't make the news, to a moment when things had gone very wrong, and then, because of one person's decision, had not gone worse. And he watched Pierce arrive at the other side of that door, and he watched what was there stop him cold. The drive was in Pierce's hand. The concrete was cold beneath their feet. Mercer was sitting against the tire, looking at nothing. Pierce said quietly, "Nathan Cross." Not a question. Nathan looked at him for a moment. Then he looked at the drive. "Independent investigators," he said. "You're going to need them here before morning. Whatever's on that drive needs to be reviewed by people with no connection to this company or this evening." He picked up his equipment bag from where he'd set it inside the fire door. "And your medic can look at my shoulder while you make the calls." He walked toward the elevator. Behind him, Pierce stood in the cold vehicle bay holding an encrypted drive, and a name he had not expected to find attached to the man who had just handed him both. The medic's name was Kowalski, and he had the hands of someone who had worked on people in worse places than a hotel security office. He didn't ask Nathan how the shoulder got the way it was. He probed it, rotated it, watched Nathan's face for the micro-expressions that people can't fully suppress when something hurts, and said, "Not dislocated, probably a partial tear in the AC joint. You're going to feel this for 6 weeks." Then he taped it, handed Nathan 2 ibuprofen from a small kit, and moved on to the graze on his cheek without comment. Nathan sat on the edge of a folding table in the secondary security office on the 2nd floor and let him work, looking at the wall. The room smelled like industrial cleaner and old coffee. A clock above the door read 11:04 p.m. Downstairs, the gala was technically still in progress, though the energy of it had shifted into something more bewildered than celebratory. Pierce had moved quickly, quietly, with the efficiency of someone who understood that the worst thing you can do in a contained situation is let the containment become visible. Guests were being gently managed toward exits, the event coordinator, Priscilla, working the room with a story about a minor electrical issue that required the venue to close early. Most people accepted it. Wealthy people at charity galas are, generally, looking for a reason to leave. Victoria Sterling had not left. She was in the main security command center 2 doors down, and Nathan could hear her voice intermittently through the wall. Not the words, but the cadence of it. The controlled, precise rhythm of a woman who was tired and shaken and refusing to let either of those things show in how she spoke. "Done," Kowalski said, stepping back. He looked at Nathan's shoulder, then at his face, with the professional detachment of someone who has rendered aid to people who didn't explain themselves and learned not to expect them to. "Don't sleep on it." "Thanks," Nathan said. Kowalski packed his kit and left. Nathan sat alone in the security office for approximately 45 seconds, which was as long as he could stand it, and then he stood up and went 2 doors down. The command center was fuller than it had been an hour ago. Chen was still at her station, but she'd been joined by a second technician Nathan didn't recognize, both of them working through the hotel's system logs with the focused intensity of people who had a deadline and knew it. Pierce was on the phone in the far corner, his voice low and deliberate, the conversation clearly important enough to require his full attention and exclude everyone else from it. 2 of his personnel stood near the door. Victoria was at the main monitor, standing, arms crossed. The drive sat on the console beside Chen's keyboard in a small evidence bag, Pierce's precaution, keeping it sealed until the right people arrived to open it. She looked up when Nathan came in. "How's the shoulder?" she said. "Taped. I'll live." He moved to a position where he could see the main monitor without being in Chen's way. "What have you got?" "System logs going back 14 months, Chen said, not looking up. Someone with Mercer's access credentials has been running queries on the archive database at irregular intervals, late nights, weekends, times when the activity would look like executive overtime to anyone doing a casual review. She paused, tapped a key. But the query patterns aren't executive overtime, they're targeted. Succession protocols, board voting thresholds, emergency authority provisions, the kind of documentation you pull when you're planning to restructure control of a company. Victoria's jaw was tight. He was looking for the threshold, she said. The provision in the Sterling Charter that allows the board to invoke emergency executive authority if the primary CEO is deemed unavailable or incapacitated. And the definition of unavailable, Nathan said, includes voluntary surrender of control under documented duress. She looked at the evidence bag, which is exactly what would have appeared on paper if tonight had gone the way he planned. A CEO who entered a private elevator and 20 minutes later signed a document under circumstances that her lawyers would have struggled to contest without the security footage that Mercer had already arranged to delete. The room was quiet for a moment, except for keyboards. He had the board votes? Nathan said. He's been operations director for 4 years. He has relationships with 7 of the 11 board members that predate my tenure. 3 of them were at this gala tonight. She uncrossed her arms, looked at her hands briefly, then looked back at the monitor. I knew he was ambitious. I knew he thought I was too young for the position. I didn't think... She stopped, started again. I didn't think he'd built a parallel structure inside my own company for the past year and a half. Nathan looked at the monitor. The query logs were dense, column after column of timestamps and database calls, but the pattern was clear once you knew what you were looking for. The slow, patient accumulation of a man who understood exactly how long he had to be careful. The drive, he said. Your assistant, Elena, hid it. She had access to the archive credentials. She would have seen the same query patterns, Victoria said. She manages my calendar and my correspondence, which means she sees things that don't come through official channels. If Damien approached her at some point, or if she saw something that made her start looking, she paused. She's been with me for 3 years. She's 26 years old, and she figured out what a 14-year veteran of this industry was doing inside our systems, and she tried to get the evidence out in the only way she could think of. And sent a message saying she was sick so she wouldn't be in the building when it happened, Nathan said. She was protecting herself. She was scared. Victoria's voice was even, but the evenness was doing work. She should have been able to come to me directly. Maybe she tried to and couldn't. Maybe she didn't think you'd believe her. People in her position usually don't. Nathan said it gently, not as a criticism, just as a fact about how organizations work, how the distance between levels of authority can make the truth feel too heavy to carry upward. Victoria looked at him. For a moment, she was just a 30-year-old woman in a torn evening gown in a room that smelled like old coffee, and the weight of the last 2 hours was visible on her face in a way that would be gone by morning, managed back into composure, but was present now. You've worked in organizations, she said. Not a question. I've worked in a few. From the corner, Pierce ended his call. He came toward them, and his expression had the quality of someone carrying information that was going to change the shape of the room. Independent investigators, he said. Colton Group. They can have a team here within 90 minutes. They have prior engagement with the Sterling Dynamics Board, which under the circumstances is either a conflict or an asset depending on how you want to play it. It's an asset, Victoria said immediately. If they have board relationships, they can move faster on the documentation review. I need the board informed before Damien does it from wherever he's going. He's not going far, Pierce said. I have a contact at the Transit Authority. His vehicle was flagged leaving the parking structure at 10:42. We have a plate. He paused. It's not my jurisdiction to do anything about that, but the investigators can coordinate with law enforcement, and that process will move faster if it starts tonight. Then start it tonight, Victoria said. Pierce nodded. He looked at Nathan. The look was the same one from the vehicle bay. Weighted, searching, the look of a man who had been sitting with a memory for the past hour and hadn't found a way to set it down. Cross, he said. Come with me for a minute. Pierce's office in the hotel's security suite was small and functional. A desk, 2 chairs, a monitor showing the camera feeds, A filing cabinet that was slightly too full and didn't close all the way. The kind of office that belonged to someone who spent most of their time not in it. He closed the door, did not sit down, stood near the desk with his hands at his sides, which was, Nathan had come to understand in the past few hours, Pierce's default posture when he was being careful about something. "I've been trying to place you since the basement," Pierce said. "The scar, the mark, the way you moved in that corridor. I've been trying to figure out why I couldn't place the face." "People look different after 6 years," Nathan said, "and I've been careful." "You have." Pierce's jaw moved slightly. Hartwell extraction. November, 6 years ago. The principal was a mid-level energy executive, secondary target. The operation was already compromised when our team arrived. Our entry team got hit in the first corridor. I was down, not moving. And there was a man who came through the south access point who shouldn't have been there because the south access point was supposed to be a dead end, and he wasn't on our team's manifest, and he got me out. He stopped. Nathan said nothing. "The official record of that operation," Pierce continued, "attributes the extraction to a supporting unit that arrived 17 minutes after the incident. The man who actually came through the south access point is not mentioned in the official record because the official record was written by people who needed the official record to say what it said." He looked at Nathan directly. "And 3 months after that operation, a specialist named Nathan Cross was formally accused of unauthorized field activity, falsification of mission parameters, and conduct prejudicial to a classified protection operation. His file was closed. He was removed from the industry." The room was quiet. The camera feeds on the monitor cycled silently through the hotel's various corridors, the ballroom now empty and half-lit, the chairs in their rows still facing a podium where a woman had stood a few hours ago and smiled at the right moments. "The south access point wasn't a dead end," Nathan said. "I'd been through the building the day before. The manifest was wrong. When the operation went sideways, I used the route I'd verified personally, which was not the route the mission planner had documented because the mission planner had not actually been inside that building." He paused. "The planner had connections that I didn't have, and I had made him look careless in front of people he cared about impressing 3 weeks earlier. That was the actual reason my file was closed." Pierce absorbed that. "I suspected something like it. At the time I tried to—" He stopped, started again. "I filed a supplemental report. I was told it was outside my lane." "I know, I saw the supplemental report." Nathan looked at the filing cabinet that wouldn't close all the way. 3 months after I was removed, I found a copy of it in my file through a FOIA request. You were the only person who filed anything. It didn't change the outcome, but I knew someone had tried." Pierce sat down then, finally, in the desk chair. He put his elbows on the desk and looked at his hands. He was, Nathan realized, not just tired. He was doing the thing people do when they've been carrying something for a long time and the weight of it has just shifted, which is not quite relief and not quite grief, but something between, something that doesn't have a clean name. "I have a son," Nathan said. "He's 9. His name is Marcus. After Hartwell, after the removal, I needed something I could show up for every day without the kind of work that puts a man in a basement in a hotel at 11 o'clock at night." He said it without self-pity, just as the explanation it was. "Audio work is good work. You're in rooms. You're useful. Nobody asks questions about your background if you do the job." "Until tonight," Pierce said. "Until tonight." Pierce was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "The supplemental report I filed, do you still have a copy?" "I have 3. Something that was almost a grim smile crossed Pierce's face. "Smart." "Paranoid," Nathan said. "There's a difference. I'm working on it." Pierce looked at the monitor. The camera feed cycled. "When the Colton group gets here tonight, I want you in the room. Not as a witness, as someone whose account of this evening is on record with investigators who are not connected to anyone who has a reason to manage it." He looked at Nathan. "There are people who will want tonight's narrative to be as simple as possible. Mercer acted alone, anomalous event. Internal protocols handled it. They will not want a detailed account from a former specialist that opens questions about how an encrypted archive drive ended up under a mixing board and how 2 official security sweeps missed a modified elevator override. Because those questions lead to other questions," Nathan said. They lead to questions about Mercer's access, and Mercer's access was authorized by a board that includes people who will not enjoy scrutiny. Pierce leaned back slightly. I'm telling you that because you should know what you're walking into if you decide to be in that room tonight. Nathan looked at the camera feeds. The empty ballroom. The north corridor, lights restored now, the framed photographs still hanging in their positions, slightly crooked from where the men had hit the wall during the struggle. He thought about 6 years of careful invisibility. About a FOIA request, and 3 copies of a supplemental report in a folder at the back of a filing cabinet in his apartment. About the particular weight of carrying something true that nobody in a position to act on it had been willing to receive. He thought about Marcus, 9 years old, nightlight in the hallway, a father who came home smelling like soldering wire and didn't talk about what he'd done before, because the before was a closed room, and Nathan had decided to keep it closed, for his son's sake, as much as his own. You could spend your whole life managing a closed room, making sure no one opened it, making sure the edges didn't show, making sure that what was inside it didn't get out and contaminate the careful, ordinary life you'd built around it. Or a night could come along and open the door anyway, and then you had a choice about what you did next. I'll be in the room, Nathan said. Yeah. The Colton group arrived at 12:40 a.m. There were 4 of them, a lead investigator named Hargrove, late 50s, the methodical energy of someone who had reviewed a great many documents in a great many difficult situations, a forensic technician who went straight to Chen's station without speaking to anyone, a legal specialist who asked for coffee and then didn't drink it, and a 4th person, a woman named Park, who said nothing for the first 30 minutes and then asked, quietly and precisely, a question about the elevator override modification that demonstrated she understood exactly what had happened better than anyone who had asked questions in the preceding 2 hours. Nathan respected that. The person in the room who says the least and then asks the most precise question is usually the one you need to be paying attention to. The review took 3 hours. The drive was opened, Victoria's biometric, her print, the authentication process completed under the investigator's observation. What was on it confirmed and exceeded what Chen's system log analysis had suggested. Mercer had not just been reading the archive. He had, over a period of 14 months, created a parallel set of documents inside the system. Board authorizations, executive directives, a signed emergency succession order that bore Victoria Sterling's digital signature on a date when she had been, according to her calendar, presenting at a conference in a different city. A forged signature. On a document that would have transferred interim executive authority to the operations director in the event of the CEO's documented unavailability. The document was dated 6 weeks ago. Mercer had been waiting for the right moment to surface it. Tonight was the moment, Hargrove said, looking at the screen with the expression of a man who had seen variations of this before and had not become entirely accustomed to it. He needed her to enter that elevator. He needed the 20-minute window. And then this document appears in the system with a timestamp that precedes tonight by 6 weeks, establishing a paper trail that says the succession was already legally authorized. He would have had board members who could testify to being informed of the succession process in advance, the legal specialist said, still not drinking his coffee. 3, possibly 4, depending on how far his conversations had gone. It would have created a contested record, her word against a documented trail and multiple corroborating witnesses. Victoria was sitting in a chair near the window which looked out onto the hotel's rear courtyard, dark now, the fountain in its center turned off for the night. She had changed at some point in the last 2 hours. Someone had found her a hotel robe to wear over the gown, which she'd accepted with the gratitude of someone whose threshold for standing on ceremony had been fully exhausted. She looked at the forged signature on the screen. "He signed my name," she said. "He had my digital credentials. He had been inside my system for over a year, and I did not—" She stopped, pressed her lips together. "I should have caught this." "Your assistant caught it," Nathan said from his position against the far wall. She looked at him. "Elena caught it," he said. "She didn't have your resources. She didn't have your authority. She had probably been trying to figure out how to tell you for weeks or months before tonight. And when tonight arrived, she found a way to get the evidence out the only way she could manage. She hid it in the one place she could access quickly, in a part of the venue she knew would be technically swept but not thoroughly searched. He paused. She's 26 and she was scared and she still found a way. Victoria held his gaze for a long moment. Then she looked back at the screen. I want her protected, she said to Hargrove. Whatever her legal exposure is for accessing the archive without authorization, I want it addressed. She acted in good faith. We'll note it, Hargrove said. I don't want it noted, I want it resolved. Hargrove looked at her over the top of his reading glasses. Yes, Ms. Sterling. At 2:15 a.m., Park spoke again. She was looking at Nathan, which she had been doing intermittently since she arrived, with the steady, unhurried attention of someone processing information that wasn't on any screen in the room. Mr. Cross, she said, your account of this evening has been recorded and it will be part of our report. I want to ask you about something adjacent to tonight. She paused. The Hartwell file, November, 6 years ago. Are you willing to discuss it in this context? The room shifted slightly. Pierce, who had been standing near the door, straightened. Chen's keyboard stopped. Nathan looked at Park. He looked at the framed window and the dark courtyard and the fountain that wasn't running. He thought about 3 copies of a supplemental report in a filing cabinet in his apartment, about a FOIA request filed 2 months after his removal by a man who had too much time and not enough work and a very specific kind of anger that needed somewhere to go, about 6 years of being careful, being small, being the man nobody looked at twice. Yes, he said. I'm willing to discuss it. Park uncapped a pen. Old-fashioned, which Nathan noted, she was the kind of person who wrote things down in her own handwriting when they mattered. Start from the beginning, she said. So he did. It took 40 minutes, and he told it plainly, without embellishment, and without the practiced minimization he'd developed over the years for the rare occasions when someone asked about the gap in his employment history. He told it as it had happened: the building, the manifest error, the south access point, the planner's report, the accusation, the removal. He told it in the same voice he used for everything else, even, not performatively calm, but actually calm, the way you are about things that happened long enough ago that the heat of them has changed into something cooler and more durable. When he finished, Park's pen had not stopped moving once. The room was quiet. Victoria was looking at him again. He'd been aware of her attention across the last 40 minutes, had felt it the way you feel a light source in your peripheral vision, steady and present. He met her eyes now. I'm sorry, she said. He shook his head slightly. You didn't do it. No, but it happened, and you're here tonight because it happened, and because whoever you were before they closed your file, that person is still... She stopped, looked for the right word. Still operational, apparently. It surprised him. The small, dry humor of it, at 2:40 in the morning in a hotel security office, after everything the night had held. It surprised him enough that something in his expression shifted, and he looked away, and the far wall of the room was just a wall, concrete block painted white, with nothing on it. I need to call my son, he said. Park looked up from her notepad. Of course. Pierce opened the door for him. Nathan went out into the hallway, and the door closed behind him, and the hallway was empty and fluorescent and quiet, and he leaned against the wall and took out his phone, restored to function sometime in the last hour once the jamming equipment in the elevator housing had been identified and disabled, and found Marcus in his contacts. The phone rang 4 times, then a sleep-thick voice trying to sound awake. Dad? Yeah, bud. It's me. What time is it? Late, early. Go back to sleep. Are you okay? Nathan looked at the fluorescent light above him, at the plain institutional ceiling of a hotel's back-of-house corridor, a world away from the marble and crystal 1 floor above. His shoulder ached in a deep, specific way that Kowalski had accurately predicted would last 6 weeks. His cheek was stiff where the bruise was developing. He was standing in a hallway at 2:40 in the morning after the longest night he'd had in 6 years, and his 9-year-old son was asking him if he was okay. Yeah, he said. I'm good. I'll be home in a few hours. A pause, the sound of blankets shifting. Mrs. Delgado made popcorn, Marcus said. We watched the nature documentary, the one about the deep ocean. Was it good? It was kind of scary. There was this fish that makes its own light. Anglerfish, Nathan said. Yeah, it was weird. Another pause. Dad? Still here. You sure you're okay? You sound— Marcus paused in the imprecise way of a child trying to find adult words. You sound like something happened. Nathan thought about that, about the accuracy of it. Something did, he said, but it worked out. Get some sleep. I'll see you in the morning. Okay, a beat. Don't be too late. I won't. He stayed on the line an extra few seconds after Marcus went quiet, listening to the sound of a child's breathing settling back toward sleep, the small, reliable sound of something that was his and intact and not going anywhere. Then he ended the call. He put the phone in his pocket. Down the hallway, through the command center door, investigators and security personnel were working through the documentation of a night that had gone wrong for one man, and because of an unlikely sequence of decisions, had not gone as wrong as it was supposed to for everyone else. In the morning, there would be lawyers and board notifications and the long, grinding institutional process of addressing what the evidence on a small encrypted drive had to say. That process would take months. It would be unpleasant for a number of people, and necessary, and ultimately it would go the way that documented evidence of this quality tends to go when it is reviewed by people without a personal stake in the outcome. Nathan knew that. He'd watched enough of those processes, from enough different positions, to know how they moved. He also knew that morning was still a few hours away, and between now and then there was more to sit with in this hallway than he was quite ready to take back into that room. He stood there a few minutes longer. The hallway light buzzed faintly, a fluorescent flicker in the third fixture from the left that maintenance hadn't gotten to yet. The kind of detail you notice when the rest of the noise has settled. Then he pushed off the wall and went back in. The Colton group finished their preliminary documentation review at 4:53 in the morning. Hargrove closed his laptop with the careful, deliberate motion of a man who had been doing this long enough to have developed small rituals around the end of difficult nights. Park filled 3 pages of her legal pad and then capped her pen. The forensic technician produced a chain of custody receipt for the encrypted drive and passed it to Pierce, who signed it without reading it because he had been watching Pierce sign documents for the past 2 hours, and he knew by now that Pierce read everything before he signed it, which meant he'd already reviewed this one and was satisfied. The legal specialist finally drank his coffee. It had been cold for 3 hours. He didn't appear to notice. Next steps, Hargrove said, addressing the room but primarily Victoria, who was still in the chair by the window. The courtyard outside had begun its slow transition from black to a deep, pre-dawn gray. Not light yet, but the suggestion of light coming, the way the sky changes its mind before it commits. We file a preliminary report with the board within 6 hours. The forensic evidence on the drive is sufficient to initiate formal proceedings against Mercer. Law enforcement has been notified and a hold has been placed on his travel documents. He won't get far. He's already been picked up, Pierce said. He'd gotten a call 20 minutes ago, quiet, stepping into the corner, and had said very little on it. Transit Authority flagged the vehicle at a fuel stop 40 miles east of the city at 3:40. Local law enforcement made contact. He's being held pending formal charges. Victoria nodded. She took that in the way she'd taken most of the night's developments. Not with visible relief, but with the steady absorption of someone processing each piece of information and filing it in the correct place before moving to the next. Nathan had watched her do that for hours now. It was, he thought, genuinely impressive, and not in the polished, performative way that people at her level sometimes projected impressiveness. It was the kind of thing that came from being tested and not breaking, which was different from never being tested at all. The board members with prior relationships to Mercer, she said, the ones he'd been cultivating. 3 have already responded to preliminary outreach with requests for legal counsel, the legal specialist said, which is informative in its own right. A 4th has not responded. The remaining 7 are clean as far as we can determine from the documentation we have tonight. 3 asking for lawyers before they've been asked a single question, Victoria said. It's informative, the specialist said again, with the flat, precise understatement of his profession. Victoria looked at the window, at the pre-dawn gray. My father built this company over 30 years. He made a lot of mistakes, and he also built something real. She said it without sentimentality, as a simple statement of record. I've spent 4 years trying to run it the way it deserved to be run. And I hired a man who spent 14 months systematically dismantling the protections I thought were in place, from inside an office 20 feet from mine. She paused. I want to know how. Not to assign blame. I want to actually understand the architecture of it so that we can build something better in its place. That will be part of the full report, Hargrove said. I know. I'm saying it out loud because I want everyone in this room to know that's the directive. Not damage control. Understanding. She looked at Hargrove. There's a difference. There is, he agreed. She looked at Nathan then. He was still in his position against the far wall. He'd been against various walls for most of the past several hours, which was where he was comfortable, the edge of rooms rather than their center. She looked at him the way she'd been looking at him intermittently since the vehicle bay, with the particular attention of someone who kept returning to a question they hadn't fully resolved. Mr. Cross, she said, you should go home. I know, he said. I'll leave when you do. Something shifted in her expression. Not quite a smile. She was too tired for a full smile and too honest to perform one, but the acknowledgement of something. That might be a while. I've got time. She left at 6:20. By then, the preliminary board notifications had gone out under Hargrove's signature. The forensic technician had transported the drive to the Colton Group's secure facility in an armored transit case, and Pierce had rotated 2 fresh personnel into the hotel to maintain coverage while his night team stood down. The hotel itself was quiet in the specific way of buildings between 4 and 7 a.m. Not empty, but suspended, the overnight staff moving through their routines in the absence of the crowds that defined the place's purpose. Nathan walked Victoria to the hotel's rear exit, the same service door he'd come through 18 hours ago. It felt longer than that. It felt like a different week. Her car was waiting. A black sedan, different driver from the one Mercer would have known about, a precaution Pierce had arranged without being asked. Victoria stopped at the door and looked at the car, and then at Nathan, and she had the expression of a person who had a number of things to say and wasn't sure which of them to say first. Elena, she said finally. I'm going to call her this morning. She'll be relieved, Nathan said. She'll also probably cry, and then she'll apologize, and then she'll cry again. She's been carrying this alone. I know. Victoria looked at the car. I should have made it easier for people to bring me difficult things. That's on me. She said it simply, without the defensive hedging people usually applied to their own failures. Just owned it, the way you own a thing, when you finally looked at it directly. I build structures, and I trust the people inside them, and I don't always check whether the people inside them feel like they can trust me back. That's a flaw in how I operate. It's a common one, Nathan said, especially in positions like yours. The altitude makes it hard to hear clearly. She looked at him. Is that experience talking? It's observation. I've worked around a lot of different people in a lot of different situations. The ones who stay intact are usually the ones who figure out how to make the people below them feel like the truth is safe to carry upward. You make it sound straightforward. It's not. It's one of the hardest things there is. It requires you to actually want to hear things you'd rather not hear. He paused. But you just spent 3 hours asking questions that most people in your position would have asked their lawyers to answer for them, so I don't think it's beyond you. Victoria looked at him for a long moment. The sky behind the hotel's roofline had moved from gray into something approaching color, the flat, pale blue that precedes actual sunrise, the world's first draft of morning. The Hartwell file, she said. Park is going to follow up on it. Formally. She didn't say that outright, but she asked for copies of your documentation before you left the room, and Park doesn't ask for things she doesn't intend to use. I know, Nathan said. I gave her what I had. 6 years is a long time to carry that. You carry what you carry, he said. You figure out what to put down and what to keep. I kept the documentation because it was the true account of what happened, and I wasn't willing to let the false one be the only version in existence. He looked at the car. The rest of it, the anger, the other parts of it, those I put down eventually, mostly. They weren't useful and they were heavy, and Marcus needed a father who could actually be present. Marcus, she said. It was the first time she'd used his name, though Nathan had spoken it once on the phone in the hallway. My son. 9 years old. He knows what you did before? Some, not the details. He knows I worked in protection. He knows something went wrong with it, and I decided to do something else. Nathan looked at the pale blue sky. He's asked me a few times if I miss it. I never know how to answer that honestly. Victoria was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Do you?" He thought about it. The real version of it, not the managed version he kept accessible for casual questions. "I miss the clarity of it," he said. "When it's working, when you're doing it right, there's a clarity to protection work that most things don't have. You know what matters. You know where to put yourself. The purpose is very simple. Keep this person intact, get them through, bring them home." He paused. "I don't miss the institution. I don't miss the politics of it. I don't miss what happened when the clarity ran into people who had different definitions of what mattered." He looked at her. "Tonight had the clarity. I'd forgotten what that felt like." She held his gaze. The morning light was doing its slow, incremental work on the sky above the roofline. "I want to offer you a position," she said. "I've been thinking about how to say this for the past hour, and I don't have a particularly elegant version of it, so I'll just say it directly. Head of Global Security for Sterling Dynamics. The role is currently occupied by a man whose organizational access is being reviewed, so it will be available. The compensation is—" "Before you finish that," Nathan said. She stopped. "I have a condition," he said. "One condition, and if it's not workable, I understand, and we part ways this morning, having had a very unusual evening, and that's all it needs to be." She waited. "Every person in that building," Nathan said. "Not the executives, not the board, not the principals. Every person. The woman at the service desk who signs technicians in at 7 p.m., the cater waiters who step over equipment bags all night, the maintenance staff, the overnight cleaners. They get the same standard of consideration in your security structure as the people in the penthouse. Not the same resources. I understand resource allocation, but the same standard of consideration, same threat assessment, same evacuation protocols, same assumption that their safety matters." He paused. "Because in my experience, the people that everyone overlooks are the ones who see what's actually happening." Elena hid that drive with the audio equipment because she understood which parts of the room go unexamined. That's institutional knowledge that only exists at a certain level of the organization, and it is worth protecting. Victoria looked at him for a long time. "That's not a difficult condition," she said finally. "It's not the condition that's difficult," he said. "It's the follow-through. It's easy to agree to it at 6:30 in the morning after the kind of night we just had. It's harder to maintain it when the quarterly budget gets reviewed and security is a line item." "Are you asking me to put it in writing?" "I'm asking you to mean it. The writing can come after." She studied him. The early light caught the fatigue in her face, the shadows under her eyes, the slight pallor of someone who hadn't slept and had run on adrenaline and will for the past 8 hours. And behind the fatigue there was something else, something that had been there all night in various forms. The fundamental seriousness of a person who understood that the decisions she made were not abstract. "I mean it," she said. Nathan nodded. "Then, yes." She extended her hand. He shook it. Her grip was firm and direct, and she didn't do the thing some people do where they cover the handshake with their other hand to make it warmer. She just shook his hand, clean and even, and let it stand for what it was. "I'll have my office contact you Monday," she said. "Get some sleep before then." "I'll try." She got in the car. The door closed. Nathan watched the sedan pull out of the rear lot and turn onto the service road that ran behind the hotel, and then it was gone. And he was standing alone in the early morning in the parking area behind the Sterling Grand, his equipment bag over his good shoulder, his bruised cheek stiffening in the cold, the sky above the roofline now committed to its pale blue and getting lighter by the minute. He found Pierce at the hotel's rear entrance finishing a call. Pierce ended it when he saw Nathan, pocketed his phone, and stood there in the way he stood. Weight even, hands relaxed, the stillness of a man who had learned over a long career that the body gives things away if you let it move carelessly. "She offered you the position," Pierce said. It wasn't a question. "She did. You took it." With conditions. Pierce nodded slowly. He looked at the lightening sky, then back at Nathan. There was something he wanted to say. Nathan could see it, the shape of it, the specific quality of a man approaching a thing he hadn't planned to approach, but found himself at anyway. I filed that supplemental report 6 years ago, Pierce said, because what I saw in that building during the Hartwell operation was accurate, and the official record was not, and I was not willing to sign off on an inaccurate record. I knew it probably wouldn't change anything. I filed it anyway because the alternative was participating in a version of events that I knew to be false, and I had not made it to that point in my career by participating in false versions of events. He paused. It did not make me popular with certain people. I know, Nathan said. I'm sorry it cost you. It cost me less than it cost you. Pierce said it plainly, without false modesty. I had seniority, I had relationships, I had the kind of institutional protection that comes with 15 years of clean work behind you. You had none of those things, and the outcome reflected that. He looked at Nathan. I've thought about it over the years, whether there was something else I could have done. There wasn't, Nathan said. You did what was available to you. The rest of it, that wasn't your failure to prevent. He said it and he meant it, which was the result of a long time spent arriving at it. It had not always been what he meant. I didn't know who filed the supplemental until 2 months after the removal. When I found out, it mattered. Knowing someone had put an accurate account on record, even if it didn't change the immediate outcome, it mattered. Pierce looked at him. Why? Nathan thought about how to say it. Because it meant the true version of what happened wasn't completely buried. It was in a file somewhere, signed by someone, which meant there was a thread, a small one, not enough to pull on alone, but a thread connecting what actually happened to a piece of institutional record that someone would eventually be able to find. He paused. People underestimate how much that matters. The true account existing somewhere, even if nobody reads it for years. It's not nothing. Pierce was quiet for a moment. Then he said, Park is good at her job. I noticed. The Hartwell file won't fix what was done, but it will establish a correct record, and some of the people involved in producing the incorrect one are still in positions where a correct record creates problems for them. He said it with the careful, even tone of a man being precise about something. Problems of the professional variety. I know, Nathan said. Does that matter to you? Nathan considered it honestly. The truthful answer was that it used to matter to him enormously. Had consumed a period of his life that he was not proud of in terms of what it had done to his sleep and his temper and his ability to be present for a small boy who needed his father to be present. He had wanted for a while the specific thing that people call justice, but often mean revenge. The satisfaction of watching consequences land on people who had avoided them. He had wanted it badly enough that it had taken him a long time to recognize the wanting itself as a weight. It matters less than it used to, he said. What matters to me now is that the accurate account exists. What happens to people as a result of it, that's someone else's work. Mine was to tell the truth when someone asked, and I did that tonight. I'm satisfied with that. Pierce looked at him for a long moment. Then he extended his hand. Nathan shook it. Monday, Pierce said. I'd like to sit down with you before you meet with Sterling's team. There are things about the organization's current security structure that you should understand before you walk into that conversation. That would be useful, Nathan said. Thank you. Pierce nodded once. He went back inside. Nathan picked up his equipment bag and walked to his car. Bessie. The drive home took 22 minutes. He had the windows down despite the morning cold, because the air inside the car felt stale and he needed something moving through it. The city at 6:45 a.m. was a specific version of itself. Quiet in a way it was never quiet at any other hour. The night crowd gone and the day crowd not yet assembled. The streets belonging temporarily to delivery trucks and joggers, and the occasional person walking with the particular purposeful stride of someone who has somewhere to be that is not optional. He thought, driving, about the night. About the sequence of small decisions that had accumulated into whatever the night had become. The drive found under the mixing board, the elevator indicator light, 2 conversations with Logan Pierce that had gone badly before they went well. About a woman named Elena, 26, who had been scared and had acted anyway, using the resources available to her, which were limited and creative and ultimately sufficient. He thought about sufficiency, about what it meant to have exactly what was needed and nothing more, and to use it. He thought about Marcus asking if he was okay at 2 in the morning, the sleep-thick voice trying to sound awake, the complete artless directness of a 9-year-old who had decided that the question mattered more than the dignity of being already asleep when his father called. He pulled into his building's parking area at 7:04. He sat in the car for a minute. His shoulder ached. His cheek ached. The ibuprofen had worn off an hour ago, and he hadn't taken more because he'd wanted to feel the edges of the night clearly rather than manage them down to a comfortable blur, which was probably not rational, but was what he'd needed. He got out of the car, went up the stairs. Elevator was available, but the stairs were 3 flights, and he used them every day, the small maintenance of a body that he still wanted to be functional. On the second landing, his shoulder reminded him firmly that he'd had a difficult evening, and he slowed down and took the rest of it carefully. Mrs. Delgado answered the door in a bathrobe. Unsurprised, she'd heard him on the stairs, she said, and had been expecting him for the last hour. She was 71 and had been in the apartment across the landing for as long as Nathan had lived here, and she had, over the course of 3 years, become the closest thing Nathan's household had to an extended family, which she accepted with the practical warmth of a woman who had raised 4 children and still had energy left over. "He's asleep," she said, in the low voice of the genuinely considerate. "Didn't get back down until after midnight, the fish movie." "Anglerfish," Nathan said. "Horrible-looking thing. I don't know why they put it so early in the program." She looked at his face, the bruise on his cheek, the slight favoring of his left shoulder. Her expression shifted through something she decided not to say. "Coffee?" "Not right now." "Thank you, Maria, for staying." "Go see your boy," she said, and closed the door. Marcus was on the pull-out couch in the living room, which was where he always slept when he stayed at Mrs. Delgado's, buried under a comforter that was slightly too large for the couch and had migrated partially onto the floor. One arm was hanging off the edge. He was profoundly, completely asleep in the way that only children and people with completely clear consciences ever manage. Nathan stood in the doorway and looked at him. 9 years old. Dark hair that needed cutting, currently going in several directions that sleep had decided on. A face that was still mostly his mother's, with Nathan's jaw beginning to assert itself in the last year or so. A kid who left his shoes in the middle of the floor and forgot to put the milk back in the refrigerator and had once, memorably, tried to build a birdhouse from online instructions and produce something that no bird would willingly enter, but that was still sitting on the apartment windowsill because Nathan hadn't been able to bring himself to throw it out. A kid who woke up at 2 in the morning to answer his father's call and asked, without preamble or context, if his father was okay. Nathan crossed the room and straightened the comforter, tucking the edge that had fallen back onto the couch. Marcus didn't stir. His breathing was slow and even, the breathing of someone with nowhere to be and nothing to worry about. Nathan sat on the edge of the coffee table, which he was not supposed to do. Marcus was not supposed to do it either, and it was a rule Nathan had established and then undermined almost immediately by doing it himself, which Marcus had noted with the forensic precision of children pointing out adult hypocrisy. He sat there for a few minutes. The apartment was quiet. The morning light was coming through the curtains now, the genuine light of early day, and it landed on the birdhouse on the windowsill and made it look, briefly, almost intentional. He called Elena Marsh at 9:15. He'd gotten her number from Victoria's assistant network directory, which Pierce had included in the information packet he'd put together before the investigators arrived. He hadn't planned to call. It was the kind of decision he made in the space between one thing and the next, in the quiet of his kitchen while coffee was brewing and Marcus was still asleep. She answered on the second ring, her voice tight with the particular tension of someone who had been waiting for a call they weren't sure would come. "Ms. Marsh," Nathan said, "my name is Nathan Cross. I was the audio technician at the gala last night. I'm the one who found the drive." A long pause, then, "Is she—" A breath. "Is Ms. Sterling—" She's fine. Everyone is fine. Mercer is in custody. He poured his coffee. I'm calling because Ms. Sterling is going to call you this morning, and I thought it might help to hear from someone first that she is not angry, not at you. She understands what you did and why you did it. The silence on the other end had a texture to it, the texture of someone trying to hold themselves together while receiving information that they had been bracing against for a very long time. I should have come to her directly, Elena said. Her voice was unsteady. I kept thinking I should just tell her, but I didn't have proof, not the kind that... And he was always in the room, almost always, and I didn't know who else might be. You did what you could with what you had, Nathan said, and it was enough. That's not nothing. A shorter silence this time. The drive was supposed to go to the building's security supervisor. There's a lost and found protocol for corporate materials. It gets logged with security, and they notify the relevant department. I thought if it got logged, there'd be a record. Even if Damien got to it before morning, there'd be a record that it had been found and turned in. She paused. I didn't think about the audio technician finding it instead. I was early, Nathan said. I usually do a pre-event sweep. The mixing board area was clear when the room was unlocked. If you hadn't found it, but I did, he said. Don't spend too much time on the version where I didn't. Another pause. Are you always this calm? He thought about it. Not always. This morning I am. She made a sound that was partway between a laugh and something else. Ms. Sterling is going to call me. Yes, pick up. Okay. A breath. Okay. He ended the call. His coffee was the right temperature now. He drank it standing at the kitchen window, looking at the street below. The morning in full operation now, the day crowd assembled. The city going about its business with the complete indifference to last night that cities always managed. Somewhere in this city, Damien Mercer was sitting in a room explaining himself to people who had been trained specifically to listen to explanations and identify their deficiencies. Somewhere, 3 board members were consulting lawyers about the nature of their prior conversations with an operations director who had been, apparently, playing a longer game than any of them had fully understood. Somewhere, the Colton Group was filing a preliminary report that would spend the next several months being the most important document in the life of a company that bore the name of the hotel where Nathan had found a drive under a mixing board and decided, against the grain of the careful, invisible life he'd built, that it was his problem, after all. And here, in this kitchen, a cup of coffee. Morning light. The sound of a 9-year-old beginning to stir in the next room. The specific sounds of Marcus waking up, which Nathan had memorized without trying, the way you memorize the sounds of things you live with and love. Dad? Slightly less sleep-thick this time. Kitchen, Nathan said. A long pause. The sounds of a comforter being negotiated. What time is it? 9:30. How come you didn't wake me up? You were asleep. I'm always asleep. You wake me up anyway. Wanted to let you sleep. Marcus appeared in the kitchen doorway, comforter around his shoulders like a cape, hair in the same several directions as earlier. He looked at his father with the unfiltered assessment of children who haven't yet learned to soften their first impressions. Your face looks bad, he said. Thank you. What happened? Work thing. Marcus looked at him for a moment. He had, even at 9, a decent instinct for the difference between answers that were complete and answers that were technically accurate. He filed this one in the second category, which Nathan could see him doing, and decided, for now, this morning, in the kitchen with sunlight coming through the window, to let it stand. Is there cereal? He said. Top cabinet. Marcus shuffled to the cabinet. Nathan finished his coffee. Outside, the city went about its morning. Tut. The board meeting was 17 days later. Nathan didn't attend it. He was not a board member, and the matters under discussion required no input from the head of global security, who had not yet technically started his role because the paperwork was still in legal review. But Victoria called him afterward, and he listened for 20 minutes while she described, in her characteristically precise way, how the meeting had gone. The 3 board members had resigned. The 4th, who hadn't returned initial outreach, had retained independent counsel and was cooperating with investigators. The remaining 7 had voted unanimously to authorize a full structural review of the company's internal security architecture, to be led by the incoming head of global security in consultation with the Colton Group's ongoing investigative team. Damian Mercer had been formally charged on 9 counts, including criminal fraud, falsification of corporate records, conspiracy, and attempted unlawful detention. His lawyer had already indicated he intended to contest several of the charges. He would not succeed with most of them because the forensic record assembled from the drive in the hotel's system logs was detailed in the specific way that forensic records assembled by people like Chen and the Colton Group's technician tended to be detailed. "The Hartwell file," Victoria said. "Park submitted her report to the relevant oversight body last week." Nathan was quiet. "It doesn't undo 6 years," she said. "I know that." "No. But the record is corrected, officially. The file is amended, and the people named in Park's report are—" She paused. "The 2 most senior are retired. One is still working. The one who is still working is no longer working as of yesterday." Nathan looked at the birdhouse on the windowsill. The improbable, lovingly constructed, structurally questionable birdhouse that Marcus had built from instructions he'd found online and been very proud of for approximately 3 days before finding the next thing to be interested in. "Thank you," he said, "for following up on it." Park followed up on it. "I told her it was important. There's a difference." "You told her it was important," Nathan said. "That's not nothing." A pause. He could hear her smiling slightly, the way you hear a smile even when you can't see one. "No, it's not." He started on a Tuesday. The Sterling Dynamics Security Division was housed on the 14th floor of the company's main building, a space that had been recently reorganized following the departure of its previous senior leadership, and which still had the slightly unsettled quality of rooms between one purpose and the next. Nathan walked through it on his first morning with a yellow legal pad, noting things, asking questions of the people who were still there, the mid-level staff, the analysts, the administrative personnel who had managed the transition and would manage the next one. He talked to the cleaning supervisor about the building's overnight access protocols. He talked to the facilities manager about the service elevator maintenance schedule. He talked to a woman named Torres who had worked the main reception desk for 11 years and knew, she said, every face that had come through those doors in that time. "Do you log them?" Nathan asked. "I log the ones that I'm supposed to log," she said. "The ones on the schedule." "What about the ones that aren't on the schedule?" She looked at him. "I remember those too. I just don't have a place to put them." "We'll make you a place to put them," Nathan said. He wrote it on the legal pad. The pad was half full by end of day. He had lunch in the building's cafeteria rather than the executive dining room because the building's cafeteria was where people talked honestly, and honesty was the resource he needed most right now, and it was available in places where people didn't feel like they were being observed by someone whose judgment of them had professional consequences. He ate a sandwich that was slightly disappointing and drank bad coffee and listened to 2 maintenance workers talking about the service bay on the building's west side, which apparently had a door that didn't close properly in cold weather and had been flagged twice for repair and not fixed. He wrote that down too. Small things. The kinds of things that everyone overlooks because they are small, and there are always larger, more visible priorities competing for attention. Nathan had spent 6 years being one of the things everyone overlooks, and he had learned in that time what gets seen from that position. He intended to use it. At 4:30, Victoria stopped by the 14th floor. She didn't stay. She had a call in 10 minutes. But she looked at the yellow legal pad on his desk, now nearly full, and at the notes on the whiteboard he'd commandeered, and at the organization chart he'd pinned to the wall with several sections circled and several lines drawn between things that didn't currently connect. "How's day 1?" she said. "Informative," he said. "There's a door on the west service bay that doesn't close in cold weather." She looked at the circled items on the chart. "That's on the facility's maintenance list. It's been on it twice. It hasn't been fixed. I want to understand why that is before winter." She looked at him. "Okay. Also, Torres at the main reception has institutional knowledge that isn't being captured anywhere formal. I want to change that." "Torres has been here 11 years, Victoria said. "I know. which means when she retires, 11 years of unlogged observational data leaves with her. He paused. She knows the face of every person who has come through those doors off schedule for a decade. That's an asset. We should treat it like one. Victoria was quiet for a moment. What else? He looked at the legal pad. A lot. But it can wait until morning. She looked at the board, then at Nathan. Then she said something he didn't expect. My father would have liked you, she said. He wasn't a warm man particularly, but he believed in the people who did the actual work. He would have listened to you. It was an offering, Nathan understood. The particular kind that people make when they want to say something true about their dead and don't have an entirely direct way of saying it. I would have listened to him, Nathan said. I'm told he built something worth protecting. He did. She said it with the simplicity of someone who had made their peace with a complicated inheritance. So let's protect it. She went back to her office for her 4:30 call. Nathan turned back to the whiteboard. That evening, he picked Marcus up from school for the first time in 3 weeks. The gala prep and the subsequent days of meetings and transitions had eaten into the ordinary routine. An ordinary routine was something Nathan had learned to treat with the seriousness that other people reserve for large events. The ordinary routine was the whole point. It was what everything else was in service of. Marcus came out the school's side door at 3:15 with his backpack on one shoulder and a drawing rolled under his arm and the expression of someone who had things to report. We did a project, he said, holding up the roll, about ecosystems. Yeah? What come up kan? Ocean ones. We had to pick an animal. He unrolled the drawing as they walked, holding it up. It was in the unmistakable aesthetic of a 9-year-old who had tried very hard, an anglerfish. The proportions were ambitious. The light-producing appendage was rendered with particular care, disproportionately large, glowing in the drawing with the specific intensity of someone who had found the thing the most interesting part. It's good, Nathan said. The teacher said it was creative, Marcus said, which Nathan understood was being reported as a mixed review. Is creative good or bad? She said it like it was good. A pause. But she said it in the voice where it might mean the proportions are wrong. Anglerfish are actually a pretty strange shape, Nathan said. Your proportions might be accurate. Marcus considered this, apparently deciding whether it was comfort or deflection, and then deciding to accept it on face value, which was, Nathan thought, a reasonable approach to a lot of things. They walked to the car and Marcus put the drawing in his backpack with the care of someone who had not entirely given up on it, and they drove home through the late afternoon city. At a light 2 blocks from their building, Marcus said, without looking up from whatever he was doing with his seatbelt buckle, Dad, yeah, the work thing the other week when you called at 2 in the morning. What about it? You went back to the other kind of work, didn't you? Not just audio stuff. Nathan looked at the light. It was still red. Yeah, he said, something like that. Are you going to keep doing it? I think so, yeah. Marcus nodded. He was quiet for a moment, still looking at the seatbelt buckle. Is it dangerous? Some of the time. I'll be careful. You said that before, about being careful. I know. The light changed. Nathan pulled forward. The thing about anglerfish, Marcus said, after a moment, in the conversational pivot that only children execute cleanly, is that their light is actually bacteria. They don't make it themselves. The light comes from something living inside them. I didn't know that, Nathan said, which was true. It's kind of weird, but also kind of good. Like they carry the light because something else put it there. Marcus looked out the window. That's what my project was actually about. I just drew an anglerfish on top. Nathan looked at the road ahead. The city going past on either side, ordinary and ongoing, the late afternoon light doing what light does at this hour. Slanting and low, catching the edges of things, making the ordinary briefly specific and bright before the day decided it was done. That's a good project, he said. I know, Marcus said. I think she'll figure that out. They pulled into the parking area. Nathan turned off the engine. For a moment they sat in the quiet of a car that has arrived somewhere and hasn't yet opened its doors, that brief suspension between being in transit and being home. What Nathan knew, what the last several weeks had assembled into something close to clarity, was this: that the truth of a thing doesn't disappear when someone buries it. It persists. It waits in the files, in the supplemental reports, in the encrypted drives hidden under mixing boards by scared 26-year-olds who have figured something out and can't find a safe way to say it. It waits for the right question asked by the right person in the right room, and when that question comes, all the patient waiting pays off at once. He had spent 6 years believing that his truth was buried well enough that it no longer mattered, had built a life deliberately scaled to accommodate that belief, and had made something real inside it: a son, a routine, a modest expertise in the acoustics of rooms that didn't belong to him. That was not nothing. That would never be nothing. But the truth had not, in fact, been buried. It had been waiting. In Pierce's supplemental report, in a FOIA folder in a filing cabinet, in the geometric mark on the inside of a wrist that a tired man recognized in a vehicle bay at 11 p.m. And when the right night came along, it came out. What comes out of a person when everything is stripped away and the situation requires them to be exactly what they are, that is the only reliable measure of a person. Not the resume, not the file, not the narrative that other people construct around you for their own convenience. What you do when it matters, that's the count. He opened the car door. Marcus was already out, backpack over one shoulder, drawing tucked carefully inside it, already moving toward the building with the forward momentum of someone who has homework and an opinion about dinner. "Come on," Marcus said, not looking back. Nathan got out of the car, locked it, followed his son inside. The city went on behind them, indifferent and enormous and full of rooms where things were hidden and waiting, and for the first time in a long time, Nathan Cross walked into his own building feeling exactly like what he was. No more managed, no more reduced, no more careful about the space he occupied. Just a man who had told the truth when it was asked of him and had come home.